Good morning. Okay, so the TPP has been doing so much because, of course, it's all of you are the TPP. So you've been doing huge amounts. So there's just a few highlights to help us to be reflecting on what has been happening. One of the highlights for me was the ambassador from Costa Rica to the United Nations at the Science Summit of the UN in New York, really galvanizing us to think about equity in food systems transformation and the extent to which we were achieving that, and the importance of farmers being involved in the processes, and how difficult it was for many, particularly women farmers, who weren't benefiting properly from agriculture, and the need for that agroecological transformation. She really set the place alive. She gave the sort of final remarks. That was a great collaboration with the Agroecology Coalition. Oliver was actually moderating that whole event, and it did have some quite deep dive work in groups on how do you look at multiple indicators of sustainable development goals. I mean, really, people were thinking about moving on from sustainable development goals. They haven't really worked. Tracking them hasn't resulted in better performance. And so we started looking at what happens if you don't just look at one at a time, but you start thinking about what's the relationship between land degradation and food security, for example, and looking up in multiple elements. And Mary Crossan, who's here, was leading that, and Alex Awiti, who's also somewhere here, took the policy tracking tool forward with the group. And Bitanga Ndemo, the ambassador to Brussels, to Belgium, and to the EU from Kenya, wrote up, he was so impressed with this session out of the whole of what he attended during the summit, that he wrote it up in a newspaper article here in Kenya, with the agroecology session as the highlight for him. That linked to a couple of other things that have been quite important events. In Agroecology Europe in Hungary, we had a session, a very interactive session on alternative strategies for fertilizing crops, and particularly substituting for industrial nitrogen. And the presentation that the TPP did on that has been looked at nearly 400 times on YouTube, which is quite a lot for a 30-minute disposition. And also connection on the policy front was at the Wallace conference in Costa Rica in May. The TPP policy paper from 2022 was taken forward in a session on transforming food systems through agroecology. We also had a fantastic event in the Stockholm Water Week, and I realizing that I promised Bernard I wouldn't just be overly positive, but also really reflective about these events and how things were going on. What was great, number one, with the Stockholm Water Week event was that it met the criteria for excellence in terms of diversity, in terms of number of women, and the ethnic mix and age distribution. What we did during that meeting was present ideas to revise the agroecological principles to try to be more inclusive of water and aquatic foods. And that then became something on the website, the web platform for the TPP, an e-consultation, so that people could all put your ideas into the key team, which is led by IMI and World Fish. Following that, we ended up at COP28, with a key session on linking land and water, at which the final version of those principles was then presented, and that will now be the subject of a paper that's due to be published. Here in East Africa, there was the first East African Agroecology Conference, and we had a side event on multi-stakeholder platforms and inclusive policy development. Key moment. And in the fourth global conference of the Sustainable Food Programme in Hanoi in Vietnam, we had a side event which looked also at CASIC. Saruk Chan presented alongside a lot of other Southeast Asian presentations. And this really was a shaping event. It was extremely well attended, and it led to the Vietnam government picking up on key aspects of what happened during that, and agroecology being enshrined as a key component of food systems transformation in Vietnam. And this Southeast Asian sort of set of countries, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam, are really leading the way in many ways in trying to integrate agroecology into food system transformation. Now, in terms of outputs, I've already mentioned the revision of the agroecological principles. That is an ongoing process. The water and the water and aquatic foods come in. We also, in that Hungary session, had a key suggestion to revise the wording of the input reduction principle, to shift from just labeling it as reducing inputs as to favoring the use of natural processes over their substitution by artificial inputs, including expensive and environmentally disruptive chemicals. And that, we think, is quite important, because it's one of the criticisms that gets leveled quite a lot, including in that Outlook on Agriculture paper by Falconi et al., which you may well be aware of. There's then been the review of knowledge on crop diversification, productivity, and substitution of industrial N, which is beginning now to get real traction in the policy space. We've got the launch of the 1 Million Voices app, and a number of people here. I see Lisa, but also the team from Brazil that does the agroecology map. So please, if you haven't been exploring the really rich information that's available, this is a citizen science project. You put your own information in there and you can look at other people's. And this reflects the fact that the community of practice has massively expanded. It's nearly 600 people now. And it's not just that people are sitting there. We're actually getting quite a bit of communication going on. People are putting things on from their experience. They're asking questions. And that's partly because there have been a number of new features which are going to be discussed later that have really brought in this ability for different people to interact. And then we've had the piloting of the policy tracking tool, which again, you'll hear about later. But this is where we're tracking the extent to which the policy recommendations of CFS on agroecology have been adopted, but not just stopping there, also looking at, do some countries go further in some aspects? Are there things which are stopping agroecology from happening? And what's the civil society perspective on what is happening? So those have been some of the key outputs. The portfolio continues to grow. There's the new Measuring Agroecology and its Performance map project, which brings CIFOR-ICRAF, CIRAD, Stats for SD, and FAO together to look at measuring the success or not of agroecological transformation in 4 African countries, and reviewing the whole way in which that is done. There's the food system transformation through agroecology project that the Liechtenstein Development Services is funding, and that has a focus on the 13 principles that we're all familiar with and how they're being put into practice, and trying to develop the soil health portfolio. We then have the co-impact system change project. Now you might think, well, I heard about that ages ago, and that's because it went through 1 year, which was just the project development to develop a prospectus on system change. That was successfully done, and RYSS, represented here by Swati Rendu Chinchilla, is now in beginning the implementation phase of a 5-year program to do a real whole system transformation in Andhra Pradesh. Extremely exciting, and very much what agroecology should be about, not just linear thinking, but whole system change. And then another one that you've probably heard about before is this GCF Knuckles project. This is about ecosystem-based adaptation. It's a $50 million GCF investment in Sri Lanka, and it uses agroecological intensification to cope with climate change and build climate resilience into the Knuckles area, key biodiversity-rich part of Sri Lanka. It has been 2 years in negotiation in terms of the modality for it to happen. These big projects often are a bit like that. Very pleased to announce that it kicked off its inception phase in 2023, was concluded, and so it's now started implementation from January this year, with the Ministry of Irrigation as the key executing entity in Sri Lanka, and really beginning to make changes right at a high level, including a new climate change office that's been created in the country in order to try to create more coherence across different ministries. As we saw happening with CASIC, with having to bring a lot of different aspects together in order to address agroecology. People. Well, I'm going to hand over to Bernard Triumph in a moment. He is the new co-convener of the TPP from CIRAD. So the TPP so far has been structured with a co-convener from CIFOR-ICRAF and a co-convener from CIRAD. Philippe Vast was the previous co-convener. He is moving towards his retirement, and so stepped down at the end of last year. And Bernard, wonderfully for us, has agreed to take over. And we also have a new scientific coordinator, Lisa Fuchs, who is here. We thank for the work and effort that she's put in, just been recognized in an award through the 1CG for the work in Kenya on the Agroecology Initiative. So congratulations, Lisa. And Sanya, where are you? Takes over as the new scientific coordinator, and I'm very pleased that she also has a social science background, which is a really important aspect of everything that happens. So Bernard, over to you.
They didn't clap for me. Bonjour, good morning, buenos dias. Can you hear me? Yes. I take over from somebody who is retiring, but I am not exactly a newborn kid. So I really couldn't help with the highlights of 23 because I just came on board. So with Fergus, we decided I would try to give you a sense of what we are trying to achieve over these 2 days, and give you a sense of a few topics which are very biased because they are topics that I have put on the table, and Fergus will discover them as we go. So I hope he won't get upset. Let's try. The spirit of this meeting, right? And already Emily went through it a little bit. The idea is active participation. And a lot of researchers, we are extremely fast at taking the floor. But I think we should also be ready to wait and see if somebody who we don't necessarily know already wants to say something. So we should wait and see if there are all these other voices, these 1 million voices we need. So please feel free. And those who are always fast, try to find something to do before you speak. Like you can write down your thoughts, you can just look around, but let's try to hear from many different voices. The second one is this idea of reflexiveness, critical thinking. I mean, it's great to clap for each other. It's great to celebrate our achievement. And it's even better to try to see what are we still missing? What could we do differently? So I think this idea of critical, what can we bring that is not yet on the table? So I think this is really something. And then, of course, we want not only to discuss, right? We want to come up with concrete way forward, concrete proposals, operational ways of moving the next step. And you remember when the TPP was started, is the idea of doing research differently. And I think many of us, can I say we struggle? Or we don't quite know what it means, because we think it's just keep doing what we have done and keep publishing and doing great work. So what does it mean doing research differently? What does it mean transdisciplinarity? Where are the people who have all these different kinds of knowledge in this room? Are they here? Are they connected? Do they speak English? So, I mean, this is kind of things we have to think about. Another thing is, I'm not very diplomatic. Those who know me already know that. But do we have enough balance between global institution, international institution, local, national people from the South? Is it the right balance that we have in this TPP? How do we manage to improve this balance to make these voices more present in what we do? And then, as I said, at the end of these 2 days, concrete way forward. So we need people who commit to move things ahead. And you know, when you say something and then you are caught and you have to do things, sometimes you don't want to say anything, right? I will not raise my hand so that nobody can ask me to do anything. But if you don't do it, how are we going to do it? Do we think it's the secretariat that has to do everything? Or do we think we can commit something that is realistic? Then some ideas. As I said, with my bias, multi-scale approaches. We talk a lot about fieldwork, we talk a lot about farm work, but there is landscape, regions, national. How do we combine these things? Systemic approaches to conceive cropping system, production systems, food systems, and not only conceive, but accompany food system actors. I think this is the kind of things that we may want to discuss. Living labs, living landscapes, and their governance. I think there are many people here. Mark, you have living landscape. Who takes decision in the living landscape? Is it still us? I mean, when we raise our hands, who are the researchers? Is it still us? We just have found a new tool? Or is it really shared governance? Combining quantitative and qualitative approaches, we say a lot, we measure things. And then we have beautiful boxes, you know, with a lot of quantitative variables. How do we do this with the qualitative approaches? How do we combine them when we assess? But not only assess, when we accompany transitions. We talk a lot monitoring, evaluation, assessment, learning. How do we do the learning? Is it here a learning space? Where are the learning spaces? What are the tools to do this? And the different scales at which this has to happen. Last one is, I mean, we say we have to work together. How do we break the barriers among our institutions? Or at least we navigate them smoothly? Because breaking barriers is could be maybe too much, but navigating, and there are organizational barriers in the way our organization have their own cultures, but cultural barriers because we are working in many different contexts. And what we want, effective partnerships, either we create them, but many of them already exist, or we want to strengthen them. And we are unequal. We are heterogeneous. It's not the same to be a research institution, an NGO, a private sector, you name it, a government. I think I stop here. Thank you very much.